Welcome back, everybody. I would love to announce the winner of the April Guess the Theme month. Congratulations to Elizabeth Case, who not only turned in her guess first, but she was selected as the winner of the month. Congratulations, Elizabeth. She will be shouted out on all of our social medias. Her name will appear on the Wall of Fame on our website, as well as she will get to choose one movie for us to talk about next year. So, Elizabeth, start thinking about what you want. All you need to do is look at our social media for clues, and in the show notes, you can call or text me at 971-245-4148, or you can email me at christy@dodgemediaproductions.com with your guess. You can guess as many times as you want. Take that, Ernie.
You're listening to Dodge Movie Podcast. Your hosts are Christy and Mike Dodge, the founders of Dodge Media Productions. We produce films and podcasts, so this is a podcast about films. Join them as they share their passion for filmmaking.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Dodge Movie Podcast. This is episode 116, and we are kicking off our month of May with special guests Dustin Morrow and Lisa Molinelli. Dustin Morrow is an Emmy-winning filmmaker, best-selling author, programmer, and educator. He is a tenured professor in the School of Film at Portland State University in Portland, Oregon, where he teaches courses in digital cinema production and film studies. He previously taught at Temple University, Monmouth College, and the University of Iowa. Before re-entering academia, Morrow was an editor and director of short-form projects and series television in Los Angeles. Professor Morrow has written books and essays, exhibited photography, produced and hosted a web series, directed a dramatic narrative podcast, produced film festivals, and directed study away programs in Dublin, London, and New York City. Given a TED Talk and an in-demand speaker at festivals and conferences in both the United States and abroad. He has written, produced, edited, and directed dozens of short and feature films in the narrative, documentary, and experimental forms. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Lisa Molinelli has a master's in library science from Simmons College and a BA in English and Women's Studies from Bucknell University. She has several years' experience working in publishing and libraries. Her passions include reading, writing, accessibility, user experience, and usability, information architecture, and instructional technology. Lisa also finds etymology fascinating and loves British costume dramas and sci-fi. Lisa is also an award-winning producer and writer. Welcome.
Hi, thanks. I'm happy to be here.
We're so excited to have you guys here. For the whole month of May, Dustin and Lisa are going to join us for our discussions on the films that we're talking about. Dustin actually chose all 4 films.
I did. I programmed the month.
Yes.
It's a Dodge Movie Podcast takeover.
And we're so excited. Okay, so like I said, we're doing 1985 After Hours, directed by Martin Scorsese. It stars Griffin Duane, Rosanna Arquette, Verna Bloom, Tommy Chong, Linda Florentino, Teri Garr, John Hurd, Cheech Marin, Catherine O'Hara, and Bronson Pinchot. So that's a great cast. Let's see. The DP is Michael Ballhaus. Mm-hmm. He did Goodfellas, Dracula in 92, Age of Innocence, and Gangs of New York. And the writer is Joseph Minion, who did Vampire's Kiss in 88, Motorama in 91, and On the Run in 99. The synopsis for this film is: an ordinary word processor has the worst night of his life after he agrees to visit a girl in SoHo he met that evening at a coffee shop. We've got 3 taglines for you guys, so you can let me know what you think. What is the very worst night you've ever had?
Yeah.
That was on a UK video, it says. What if the date you thought would never end didn't?
A little bit better.
That's a little bit better.
It's a little more specific, yeah.
And when it's after midnight in New York City, you don't have to look for love, laughter, and trouble. They'll all find you.
Oh, God. That's a little wordy. I mean, the problem is, how would you promote this movie?
Yeah.
It would be a nightmare to try to promote this
Yeah,
movie.
I think the middle one is good. The Date That Never Ends.
Yeah, I mean,
the
for a
best
movie
of the
this
three.
weird, you need a weird
Yeah.
tagline.
Yeah. Nightmare is a good word to use, I think.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah.
Okay, Mike, kick us off with your pickup line.
Okay, punch it in. Doesn't support
who
my theory.
delivers it?
It's either the character played by Griffin Duane, I think his name is Paul, or someone else at his work. It's from the workplace. They're learning to use the advanced computing of the era.
Okay. All right, Dustin, why did you pick this movie?
Well, I'll just speak more broadly, quickly about the whole month, which, you know, I know that you guys like to have people guess the themes, but no one would guess this theme. And so I'm just going to talk about it.
Give him a freebie this month.
Yeah, give them a freebie. I mean, there are things that these movies have in common beyond the one I'm about to mention. But the reason I picked these 4 films is because I think that they made for a really interesting mini film cycle that was first written about by a British film scholar named Leighton Grist. And he called it the yuppie nightmare cycle. And essentially, it was films where you take some upwardly mobile young man, it's always a man, and you sort of cast him down into Hades, usually over the course of one night, so he has a sort of continuously nightmarish experience where he's trying to do something very simple. Like in the film that we're about to talk about, he's just trying to get home. He just wants to go home. And you put every obstacle you can possibly put in front of him and just make his life a total living hell. And we could talk about why that might have been something interesting to filmmakers in the mid 80s when yuppies were kind of at their height and everybody was kind of hating on yuppies, especially big city yuppies. The films in the yuppie nightmare cycle were always a mix of screwball comedy and film noir, usually with a real sharp edge and some pretty intense violence for what are otherwise comedies. So the movies were After Hours, Into the Night, Something Wild, and Miracle Mile, which is the movies that we're going to be watching this month. And also you can add Blind Date, which is a terrible Blake Edwards comedy with Bruce Willis and Kim Basinger, and the much better Blue Velvet, which is a David Lynch film. It's the movie that really put David Lynch on the map in a more sort of mainstream way, to the degree that you can call that movie mainstream. You could also add movies like Fatal Attraction. And if you expand to the early 90s, you could put in like Unlawful Entry with Kurt Russell and Ray Liotta, or Hand That Rocks the Cradle with Rebecca De Mornay. Any movie where you take sort of a yuppie that seems to have everything going for their life and basically try to destroy it. Yeah.
So it sounds like it's more the subject matter than maybe the techniques in the film. Like, was there any part of the cinematography or the editing or those kind of...
Well, I think all the films we're going to be looking at have a better than average strain of what you might call the surreal.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Especially this one. This is probably the most surreal of all the movies we're going to watch this month.
And I feel like this one couldn't be made today, or it would have to have different challenges.
Yeah, one of the things that is he only has $20. And I find that kind of thing funny because in the current era of Apple Pay and smartphones, the idea of running out of money is kind of foreign to some people. Whereas when we roll back, even before ATMs, having cash was an actual task. It was a chore. You had to physically go down to the bank and convince them to give you some cash. And when you ran out, you were out.
Yeah.
So that was the immediate thing I thought when he opened his wallet and he only had a 20. I thought, oh wow, would that make sense today in a film? I think he'd have to do something different.
He'd have to lose his smartphone. He'd have to, or it'd have to be no power on his smartphone or something. That would be kind of interesting. Yeah.
What about? I have a note here. I liked when he first goes to Linda Fiorentino's loft, the use of light. Like there was a lot of candlelight, there was a lot of lanterns, there was a lot of we try so hard to light our films well so that people can see, but I noticed like half the frame would be in the dark and
well, but the mouse traps were really well lit. I have a note here. Spotlights on the mouse traps. Yeah,
are you making a joke?
Speaking of surreal, no. Literally they had spotlights on the mouse traps around your bed. Made no sense to me.
Well, to give that feeling of how
but
creepy.
Who puts spotlights on their mouse traps? I think that defeats the purpose. The mouses don't go over there. It's a trap.
Well, these are downtown artists. You never know. Yeah.
See, I knew watching this movie was going to be a challenge for Mike, because when I listen to this podcast, Mike is between the two of you, Mike is the stickler for narrative inconsistency and things that step outside the real. And this movie is very outside the real, right? It's
One
very
hopes.
surreal, which we can talk about because I think that's really hard to do well. This is maybe my favorite movie that is a surreal movie, because most things that filmmakers try to make surreal just end up being weird for weird's sake. And to do surreal right, I think you have to have one foot in the real. Like the real is part of the word surreal. It needs to be a blending of fact and fiction, because if you step too far into the weird, then you lose your audience. And I know for me, one of the things I love about this movie is even though it plays like a cartoon at times, it never loses its tension. It's a very I find it a very disturbing. Yeah. Like the movie puts a knot in my gut while I'm watching it. And I don't think that would happen if it went full cartoon.
Yeah.
No, you're absolutely correct. I was going to say, this is when Mike goes, then why are you watching this movie? He doesn't understand why you would watch a movie that gives you a knot. Yeah. A knot in your stomach.
It kind of reminds me of that's surreal, but also real. It reminds me of my own dreams, if I may. I'm not going to talk about my dream or anything, but don't worry. But it reminds me of that feeling of not being able to get someplace. That happens to me a lot. So that you're trying to get someplace and you can't get someplace, and then you're somewhere else that you didn't intend to be. And this movie reminded me a lot of that, which in a way is kind of real. A lot of us probably have had that experience.
God, you're totally right. Everybody's had a dream where you're due to arrive somewhere, like a test or the airport or somewhere, and you can just never.
This is literally 99% of my dreams. Yeah.
This is totally that dream.
It reminded me a lot of that experience, and I don't know, maybe others can relate to that, and that gives you that grounding of like, oh yeah, I've been here before. Yeah.
So what did you guys think of it? I'm just curious. Did you even like it? It's a divisive film, I think, even in Scorsese's filmography.
It is.
Even if you're a Scorsese fan.
Yes.
Not all Scorsese fans like this one. Right? What did you think?
So it's the second time I watched it because I was grateful enough.
In my class.
Yes. In the study away program, we had to watch it, and I didn't like it then.
That's fair.
Because I kept wanting, I was just like, just go home. Just go home. At times it didn't feel like he was always trying to go home. And I very much had that knot in my stomach. Like, just
get out of
stop.
there.
Just turn around. Like, just walk home. And I think in the trivia I found it would have taken, it was like, oh no, it was 19 miles, or it would have.
I don't think it was 19 miles, but that was one of our pauses when I paused and said, how far would it have been if he'd walked? And I think we looked on Google, and it would be like an hour and a half or something. It's a non-trivial walk, but it's doable.
It would have taken Paul an hour and 47 minutes to walk home, assuming he walks at an average of 3 miles per hour.
Right.
Which is a brisk walk, but
from Kiki's SoHo loft to his uptown apartment.
Right.
Mind you, this is walking through nocturnal New York
80s
City.
New York, which is different.
80s.
Yeah. He's way downtown in like a weird part of town.
The odds are also good he would have been killed on that walk.
That's true. Kind of Warriors style.
I was going to say, it started to be reminiscent of the Warriors.
Yeah.
But I think this film, so I will say, I liked it. I think probably the best of this cycle. And I don't think it would work if it wasn't at night. I think there's not only plotting, but also visually. I think it works better as a night film. And of course, a lot of these films do have that component to them, but there is something different. And I have this mindset, right? This theory that nighttime, you view images in a more visceral, emotional state. And I think that works for these films to give that sense, like it's almost like a dream where I can't get there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's all these obstacles. And it was interesting that Christy said he didn't want to go home. I don't remember feeling like he wasn't always. I felt like he was always trying to get home, but it was just bizarre. There was a dead body involved. That's a pretty odd thing right? And that's that surreal kind of dreamlike quality that just you know, oh, this person's dead. Okay, well, I'll leave. I made a note of the signs that said "dead person" with an arrow.
Yeah.
That was very kind of him to help the authorities find the dead person
this way.
Yeah.
Well, you're also right that once you strip daylight out of the scene, then it's all on the DP, right? It's all on the cinematographer to provide access to what we're going to see and how we're going to see it. Because once you remove sort of omniscient light, then it's, you know, that it's a very striking looking movie.
I have my notes sound like him. Who puts $20 like in the door of the cab so that it can, with the window open so that it can fly out?
Yeah.
Who puts paper towels in the toilet so that it overflows? Like, it
What
just
a
felt
moment
like
that
common
was.
sense
Yeah.
things that you wouldn't do that made his life harder. But I guess there are people out there who kind of tend to do things that make their life harder.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I could defend those choices a little bit. I think he puts that money up there. I mean, that's the tray that, you know, you can convey the money from the back seat to the front seat. And
I thought it was on the door.
no, he
No,
puts
it was
it
in
up
that
on
divider.
the divider
Yeah.
so that the guy driving the cab can pull it. But I think it's a boss move to do that. I mean, it's something you would do if like you
He's a
had a girl
yuppie.
with you
Yeah.
in the back seat, right? And he's on his way. He's just starting the night, so he's
Right.
heading downtown, and he thinks he's going to get laid. That's the whole reason he's going down there anyway. That's why, of all the protagonists that we're going to talk about this month, this one is maybe the hardest one to have some sympathy for because he's literally just going down
Like a
there.
booty call in the
Yeah,
80s,
it's essentially an 80s booty call.
Yeah.
And when that one doesn't work out, he quickly shifts over to
he's-
try to score with another
yeah,
lady.
any
So
opportunity.
yeah,
Yeah,
dirtbag
yeah.
is right there.
But he's got confidence on his way downtown, right?
Right.
And you see that confidence kind of stripped away over the course of the movie. Yeah. He's also got a sense of fairness in him, even though he tries to jump the turnstile after he's told that the fee for riding the
it's just
subway
gone up
goes
at
up.
midnight, yeah.
Like he does when he finds the same cab driver later in the movie, like he tries to pay him.
yeah, that's true.
And so, you know, he's not
He's not
without
completely
all ethics, although, you know, he does occasionally questionable things.
He's a flawed human being.
Yeah.
I mean, the $20 he comes up with later is something he strips off of Linda Fiorentino's piece of art,
paper
the
mache.
sculpture that she's made.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah.
What did you think of the cast in this movie?
I mean, it's amazing.
Isn't it?
Yeah. Great cast.
He meets this series of femme fatales, right? It's so interesting. And they're all so incredibly different and yet all really representative of
like a bunch
New
of
York in an
archetypes.
interesting
Yeah.
way. Yeah. So he goes from Rosanna Arquette, who's one of the most beautiful women in the world at that time.
Songs written about her. Yeah.
She had multiple massive
songs.
pop songs
Yep.
written about her, just an icon even in that era.
Yep.
And then the very edgy and strange Linda Fiorentino. And then he
And
goes
they're roommates,
to,
and one's all in white and one's all in black.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
very-
And then
yeah.
to Teri Garr, right, who looks like this 1950s beehive.
Yeah.
Yeah, sort of living this incredibly insular life. And then Catherine O'Hara, who's this sort of beatnik ice cream truck driver. And then finally Verna Bloom, who is this damaged older party girl who lives beneath a nightclub. It's just an
love that.
incredibly
Yeah.
strange series of femme fatales.
This is maybe a little off topic, but I was paying such close attention. I've watched this movie a few times myself, and I was paying such close attention to their wardrobe. And I don't know, I just noticed that Rosanna Arquette was all in white again, or for the most part, Linda Fiorentino all in black. Then you get Teri Garr, who's got the black and yellow thing going on. And then Catherine O'Hara also has the black and yellow thing going on. And I think Verna Bloom, I'm not sure I have that right. She's mostly black, but with a little yellow, I think. I don't know what any of that means, but it seemed very intentional.
From wardrobe, I thought it was odd that Linda Fiorentino's character was plastering in a bra and miniskirt.
Oh, I know, yeah.
Seemed odd. I thought
Seemed
maybe
odd.
a smock. Just throw it on.
I guess I kept writing that off as like, this is downtown New York City in the 80s. These are artists.
Right.
Like, they'll just do whatever.
Well, and that's another thing. I think that the plot point of where he calls up Marcy, I think is Rosanna Arquette's character, and he says, hey, do you remember? She says no, but then she invites him to her place after midnight for a hookup. I thought, but I think maybe for 1980 that would actually make sense.
Yeah.
Like pre-AIDS, that perhaps was the culture in New York of like, oh yeah, I kind of know you, let's have sex. But it was, that to me was a little bit odd that she didn't remember him and she was still inviting him over.
I love how quickly Catherine O'Hara's character turned on him, and like just the visual of the Mr. Softy truck and the mob chasing him down the street.
Yeah, that's a lot of fun.
Was hilarious.
Oh my gosh,
it's so bizarre.
It's a lot of that.
Yeah, it's also it's a very New York movie, and that's one of the reasons I assigned it in that course, which was of course a New York film. It really captures not necessarily the reality of downtown, of Soho, of the village, but certainly the mindset.
The feel, yeah, I would say
the
so.
kinds of people you would run into, the punk rock club, the art, the sort of nihilistic artist with the loft, the kind of spacey bohemian girl. It was a much more so than I think nowadays. There was a real difference between people who lived uptown and people who lived downtown in New York, and the idea of being an uptown yuppie and going down to the freewheeling
going into
downtown
this underworld almost.
Was very much was a thing. So even though you're right, like he could have walked home in a couple hours, in the landscape of the movie, like it's an untraversable distance that he's going, right? Because the uptown and downtown are so different,
especially back then.
Yeah.
I hate to be the person who's like, it's all a dream. I don't know that I think it is, but I just kept coming back to that idea of the dreamlike quality. Like, did he fall asleep on his couch and the phone calls in his dream? Like, none of this, you're right. A lot of the stuff he does and anybody does in this film doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense, but it has such a dream nightmare-like quality to me that it gives you that back and forth of like, is this real? Is this
all
not
the
real?
movies we're watching this month
all have that. Yeah.
And some of them really explicitly, like Miracle Mile and Into the Night, direct. There are scenes at the beginnings of those movies that make you think this he could definitely just be asleep.
Yeah. So I don't know. I guess that's part of why I didn't worry so much about the weird things they were doing, because I was like, maybe this is not real. Or, also in the middle of the night, I think you make, or maybe it's just me, you make maybe not the best choices, or you do strange things that you normally do.
Yeah, that's what we call it, 2 a.m. thinking.
Oh, yeah.
Like when you wake up and you're like, oh my God, I think I have a tumor.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Panic moments.
2 a.m. thinking, that's good.
Yeah.
That'd be another good name for the
not
theme.
Your best thinking, by the way.
Yeah.
There should be a lockout on your phone or something.
You're so right. Yes.
And to that end, in the beginning, I noticed his apartment was just like beige.
Yes.
Like everything was, and his suit was even
the wardrobe thing again.
It was that very much lensed to what you guys are talking about, that he would escape that to go to the colorful
downtown, dark.
Soho
area. The beige thing, I noticed that too, especially in the diner when he meets her in the diner. I think literally everyone or almost everyone in the diner is also wearing beige or some version of beige.
Except for her, maybe.
I think she's still wearing that white dress. I might be wrong. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Well, and when he gets to Kiki's loft, he literally loses his shirt.
Right. Yep, and he has to put on a black shirt under his beige.
And it's like, you're in it. You're down here now.
I don't know. I'm sorry to keep going on about clothes, but I just, I noticed it a lot this time, especially in this movie, the way the colors changed.
Yeah. That's generally a topic we talk about, because that does inform the audience, even if it's subconsciously.
Yeah, I noticed it a lot.
So do you have notes on, because I know a little bit about the background and the making of this movie. Did you read about the connection of this movie to The Last Temptation of Christ? The making of this film is sort of fascinating. It was the screenplay, I think, was a senior project for a film student at NYU, I think he was at. And the script was found by Griffin Dunne and Amy Robinson, I think is her name, is an actress who was in Mean Streets. And so she knew Scorsese. And they took it to Scorsese after the cancellation of the 11th hour cancellation of the funding of his longtime passion project, which was The Last Temptation of Christ, which is a movie he did end up making a few years later. But he was like days away from shooting that movie. They had built the sets, they had to book the locations, they had their cast, and the funding just fell out from beneath it. And he was just devastated to the point where I think he's said in interviews, like he was like, I wasn't sure I was going to make another movie. That's
he was
how,
really, really depressed, right?
That's how horrible it was. And so it was suggested to him that maybe the best way to get over that would just be to get behind a camera and make something small and fast as quickly as possible. And so this project kind of fell into his lap. And I think, and we could talk about this too, especially with Into the Night, when we talk about that movie. I think Scorsese's mindset, his sort of bitterness and his anger and his perhaps despondency while making After Hours is there in like every frame of this movie, right?
Yeah, I agree.
That like not that Mike's allergic to.
Fair enough.
The stomach.
Yeah.
I think part of that comes from Scorsese's mood and outlook on life when he was making this film, and I always find that really fascinating when you can like see a filmmaker's state of mind in the movie itself, even if it's just in the subtext.
Did you guys see him in the film?
Yes.
He was in
He's in the nightclub.
In the nightclub, shining a light on everybody.
Yes, that's right.
Which he seems kind of frantic even doing that, although I guess.
He's got a little handheld spotlight
and he's
standing
shining it
up
on
in the
everybody.
rafters and he's pointing it at people, which, is there a better metaphor for directing than that?
But this seems challenging if you were in not the best space. I would think it would be easier to make something that was very broad, very simple. I don't know, like Grown Ups or something like that. Yeah. Some Adam Sandler film. Seems like it'd be easier than a film like this, which you mentioned, because it's surreal, it requires a very skilled hand for it not to come across as either just outright confusing or kind of ridiculous. So that is curious that was, I mean, I can totally see working out your emotions that way, but it just seems like a daunting project.
Yeah. Plus, from a practical level, it's just all night shoots, right? Which are really hard. It was less than a month. It's like a 24-day shoot or something like that. But still, 24 nights of working like 14 hours is going to take its toll on anybody. I do wonder, sort of the question Mike raises in my head, which is interesting, is we can talk about this as sort of, I think, a masterpiece of the surreal in cinema, but how surreal did Scorsese think it was when he was making it, and how surreal did it just come out because Scorsese was kind of out of his mind while he was making it? Like maybe good question. Maybe in his head when he sat down to ideate the film, it wasn't really meant to be this kind of surreal,
right?
Or quite as strange as it ended up being. It's just that's Into the Night, the same question. When we get to that movie, I'm going to ask the exact same question.
I suppose seeing the screenplay would help. I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting. It's a good question.
Do you have anything else that you want to talk about this film?
Well, I just think the themes of this movie are really interesting. It's not just meant to be a piece of entertainment. It really is, I think, trying to say something about New York, and especially about male-female relationships. I mean, the movie is about castration and emasculation, right? Every step of the way, Paul is being knocked down by these different women. Yeah. And in a lot of cases, they're women he's trying to sleep with. Right? So they're all sexually aggressive toward him, every one of them. And I think the key moment in the movie, this is where the Dodge Movie Podcast goes PG-13. So he's in the bathroom. I think it's at the diner where he promises to order something and then doesn't. Or he does and then he doesn't come back to eat it.
Right.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So he's in the bathroom and he's like washing his hands, and then he goes to rip some towels off, and next to the towel holder, somebody has scribbled a guy with an erection, and it's being bitten by an alligator,
or a shark or something.
Something
with very sharp
like
teeth.
That.
Yeah,
I was like, that's the movie. Like that's the image of the movie in a nutshell.
It's pretty clear.
Right? Like that's it's a
Yeah.
I don't know. Is it a cautionary tale?
Yeah,
Don't go downtown. Be careful,
Especially
be
after
careful
midnight,
of the
yeah.
aggressive woman. You know, Scorsese grew up Catholic and very conservative, very reserved. And if you look at like the portrayal of women and across his whole filmography, it's not exactly a greatest hits of feminism and you know it's a mixed bag. And I do sometimes wonder like what his religious and sort of that background that he had growing up in that era, you know, what his feelings about women are, because this is of all his movies, this is the movie that sort of seems to most directly wrestle with it.
There were a couple other symbols I kind of noticed throughout, although I don't know how they relate to this or not, but maybe you guys noticed them too. Burns or scars come up a lot, which, there's Rosanna Arquette. I don't know. Does she mention she has a burn, or there's some allusion to her having burns, and she's got this burn cream that
she never mentions it.
She never mentions
he finds her prescription for her burn
and there's
cream,
this
and then
book
he finds a textbook about burns.
But there was some other. I won't look into my notes too far, but I think there was some other stuff about burns and scars throughout the movie that I thought was interesting. And he gets covered in plaster of Paris at the end of the movie, which reminds me of being like bandaged. And then the other thread I noticed throughout the movie was skulls. You see the image of skulls throughout the movie, either in people's tattoos or necklaces they're wearing. Skulls everywhere, which to
John
me,
Hurt's character's keychain that he gives him to go use his
it's
apartment
very,
is
you
a
see
skull.
skulls everywhere. And that made me think of like, you know, that whole memento mori mortality thing. But I don't know if it was that so much as creepy, weird, you know.
What did you guys think of the
know.
ending? Do you remember?
Yeah, good question.
So I thought he goes back to work just like the next day.
He does.
Basically,
So Verna
sort of.
Bloom, because the mob is invading the nightclub, she hides him inside a plaster of Paris statue. This is the second time a plaster of Paris statue has showed up. So she puts him, she basically builds him in this thing, and then the glue hardens while the
Very
mob
Edgar
is
Allan
searching
Poe.
the apartment, and he can't get out, and she refuses to let him out. She's like, they could come back at any time. And then Cheech and Chong, of all people, break into the apartment, and they're like, hey, it's my statue, because they think it's the Linda Fiorentino statue from earlier. And they steal it, and they load it in the back of the van, and he can't even speak because she has plaster of Paris over his mouth. And then they drive uptown, and he falls out the back of the van, and cracks open, and he's standing right in front of his office as the office doors are opening.
Right.
So he hasn't gotten anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's still beige.
He's still beige.
Like covered in dust.
But he's got the black shirt now, so he's a little bit better.
But he's totally covered in dust, and he just goes back into his word processing job.
But it's so brilliant because the whole movie's about confining him, right?
Yes.
He can't get where he needs to go. Yeah. And it ultimately gets to the point where he can't even physically move or speak.
Exactly.
Like that's how confined he ends up.
I think he's even in a like screaming, cowering position or something.
You see his
almost, his eyes behind the mask. Yeah.
But then to me, he ends up back at his job, meaning nothing has changed.
Right.
Yep.
Right. It's just
for him.
this giant cycle, and he's back to, okay, punch it in.
Yeah.
He hasn't learned a thing.
No.
Which is quite different from the other movies where they end up. In those movies, I think which is a difference between.
So it's interesting because you say, why was Cheech and Chong there? Well, did they need a little upsurgence because they were big in the 70s and did things slow down in the 80s? And so Martin was maybe like, well, this will bring in some people that Cheech and Chong will be in it.
I would be curious to know. I have a hard time believing that he cast them for any kind of financial reason. I suspect that there's something about.
Okay, so here's my theory.
Okay,
yeah,
go for
please.
it.
I went to college with a gal whose dealer was the same person who sold weed to the Beastie Boys. So I'm wondering if maybe Martin had some
a supplier
other connection where he ran into them and he's like, oh, you guys seem good. I'll put you in my film. Maybe that was it. It seems like it's outside of the narrative.
I think it was more Griffin Dunne's dealer.
Interesting.
Not Martin's dealer.
Yeah.
But I like how the scene setting up where they're stealing the statue sets us up for the ending.
Right,
And you
yeah.
don't really see that coming, but then
But I
it's a
think your
fun-
point is taken in the sense that they are so comedic, and certainly in that era, the moment you see Cheech and Chong on screen, people, ha ha ha, right?
Yeah,
They're iconic. And so that does bring a different levity to it. Maybe you'd even say grounds it a bit, because you're like, okay, I understand these guys and their sense of humor. I kind of have some sort of reference point for the rest of the film.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a comedy, and that's not Scorsese's
Right.
thing. And so maybe it was just insurance to make sure that it plays and or is viewed as a comedy.
I mean,
King of comedy, though, right?
He did, but that's
Which is
not a
more
comedy
serious.
at all.
No, it's more serious.
I mean, talk about disturbing. That movie's not remotely funny.
he also cast a couple of great comedic actresses
Teri
too.
Garr
Terry
was
Garr
a
and
great-
Catherine O'Hara.
Yeah, Catherine O'Hara.
Although I don't know if
She's
that was
brilliant.
the same point. I know, totally. Yeah.
Well, she had done
they're both so
SCTV by
great.
that point. So
Okay,
she definitely
so-
had a name.
Right.
Yeah.
She's fantastic. Okay.
Did you like this movie?
I think I like this movie the best of them. I like it. It was okay, right? You
I'm
mentioned
amazed when people can be like just sort of in the middle on something.
yeah, it's not whispering. The other films I have bigger
She's
problems
going, he
with.
didn't like
You
it.
didn't like it.
Yeah.
No, but you mentioned
You don't have to like it. That's
you
fine.
mentioned Blue Velvet earlier,
Uh-huh.
and I saw that in the theater, and that was disturbing and weird, and I didn't care for it so much. I like this better than that.
I hated Blue Velvet, and so I liked this better.
All right. Do you have anything else,
No.
guys? Okay. Mike, was there any head trauma in this film?
I did not detect any head trauma, although you might argue that when he's pushed out of the van,
Right.
there could have been
Yes.
some head trauma there.
Yes. Implied head trauma.
Yeah.
All right. How about Smoochies?
Let me do it. Smoochie, smoochie.
Awesome. New soundbite. Yes. I'm using that from now on. I have no Smoochies recorded, which is
Wait.
odd because
That
he
is
kept
odd.
trying to get together with everyone.
Right.
You're right.
He
There's
didn't
no
even
kissing.
But if they happened, they were so surreal, I didn't make note of them.
Right. I'm trying to think back now, and I'm like, I don't think
well,
it
there
ever.
was a part
He
where
made out with Rosanna for.
Oh wait.
no, there was a part where he was looking at a dead body that was naked, but there was no smooching that was going on.
No, and earlier in the film, I thought but maybe no. She showed him to her room, and then she left, and that's when he was
that
kind
gets
of.
back to maybe the
Yeah. So I
emasculation
guess
part.
they didn't.
Yeah.
He didn't even get a kiss.
He kissed his butt goodbye.
Yeah, he did.
There's your
All right.
smoochy.
Yeah. And a driving review.
All right, so I just have a few things. One is the cab ride footage was obviously sped up in post for that chase scene, but it's still pretty insane, even if they'd shown it at regular speed. I love the Mr. Softy food truck chase scene. That was a hoot. But I'm not sure what the performance characteristics of that Boyertown merchandiser. Those vehicles are not normally known for their performance. So
Is that the
that's
name
the
of the
Mr. Softy truck? Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
I
it's a
had no idea.
Boyertown merchandiser. In case you wanted to get one yourself.
I had no idea.
paint it
So
up.
interesting. Okay.
All right. Shall we go to the numbers?
Let's go to the numbers.
Okay. This movie had a budget of $4.5 million. It made domestically $10.6 million, so it's about 2.5 times, a little bit less. And adjusted for inflation today, that would be like making $27.4 million. So
That's pretty good for a movie this weird.
Yeah. No kidding.
Yeah,
Very much.
absolutely.
Yeah.
It did score well. It got a 7.6 out of 10 on IMDb, and those scores are generally tend to run low. Critics loved this at 91%, and audiences aren't quite as high, but 87%. So this is a well-liked film.
That number, that critic number, I think would be much higher if it was re-reviewed now.
Oh, yeah, I don't know how Rotten
A hindsight
Tomatoes,
thing.
if they do older ones or newer ones. I don't know how their algorithm.
I think it's
Yeah.
a mix. I mean, I think it's whenever it was written, they factor it in. But that's the thing about Rotten Tomatoes that's always a little tricky is that a lot of movies, especially cult movies like the ones we'll
Right.
be talking about this
Yeah.
month, don't review as well when they come out. And then as their reputation grows.
What was his reputation, or you know,
Yeah.
Right. That
back
makes a
then
difference.
as now he's the god
Yeah,
of
he's- yeah.
all directors.
Yeah.
That is so interesting to me to hear he thought he would never make a movie again. Can you imagine Martin
Oh my
Scorsese ever
goodness.
thinking that? Like, it's so funny. I mean,
Well, he hadn't made that much, but
Yeah,
at
I mean,
that
it's a different
He had
time,
done
but-
Raging Bull, which was universally acclaimed
Yeah.
and won De Niro an Oscar, but was not a hit. And
Yeah.
you know, he wasn't a particularly commercially reliable filmmaker in that period.
I guess I just think that should be heartening to all filmmakers out there that even Martin Scorsese had a moment, like a moment where he's like, maybe I'll never work again, you know?
Yes, absolutely. I totally can see that. Right here, take all the equipment, take my typewriter. This is I'm done. This is over.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally, absolutely. I think that's part of every project.
Yeah, of
Right?
course. Yeah, for everybody. So even Martin Scorsese has been there, guys. Like,
Yeah. Oh, there's a line that he said that if you, something to the effect of, if you don't see the first rough cut and hate it, you're you're basically, you're not doing it right.
I think I've heard that too. Yeah.
Something to that effect. And I was like, oh, I felt better that now when I see the first cut, I'm like, oh, that's atrocious. What am I doing? I should, again, burn everything, move to another country, change my name. This is over.
Right.
And so I loved hearing that he had
Even
the first,
Marty-
like, what have I done? This is horrific.
Marty says you're on the right track.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's just
We're in good
part of
company.
the process.
Yeah. It was an hour and 37 minutes. It's rated R. It's labeled as a comedy crime drama. So
Crime drama.
Yeah, that's,
Not a lot of crime in there.
I mean, a
It's just a
tiny
stolen
little
statue.
bit. Right. Right. And even that, they claim it was theirs, right?
Yeah, it was from the Geffen Company, and there's quite a few awards. Rosanna was nominated for a BAFTA. Martin Scorsese was nominated. Well, I guess there's got to be a winner here. So it was nominated for a best film at the Chaires du Cinéma. Is that you never heard of it?
No.
Martin did win best director and was nominated for the Palme d'Or at Cannes in '86. So I knew there was. Let me see.
The French are
They, of
always
course, they would
the
love
French
it.
are always
Love
ahead
it.
of us
Yeah,
when it comes to
yeah.
art film.
Makes perfect
Well,
sense.
certainly surreal films, that seems very
Oh,
French
yeah.
to me.
Yeah. Agreed.
Martin was won Best Director at the Independent Spirit Awards. Griffin was nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Actor. And then I have here as producers, Griffith Dunne, Robert Colesbury, and Amy Robinson won for Best Feature at the Independent Spirit Awards. So
Nice.
that will do it for this episode of After Hours. Thank you for joining us. You got a big hint at the top of the show, so go ahead and text me your guess at 971-245-4148. And stay tuned. Next week, we will be talking about Into the Night. And never forget,
Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.
Thanks for listening to Dodge Movie Podcast with Christy and Mike Dodge of Dodge Media Productions. To find out more about this podcast and what we do, go to dodgemediaproductions.com. Subscribe, share, leave a comment, and tell us what we should watch next. Dodges never stop, and neither do the movies.